Okay, in this video I want to cover a couple of inexpensive modifications that I've done to my AR-15. Not an expert, trying to just pass on some information that might be helpful to you. There are a couple of things that I wasn't happy about with this thing. I'm going to start off with the first one was that the upper receiver to the lower receiver, there was quite a bit of play there. Sloppy. Well, when I got done with what I did, and I'll show you, I actually have to use a punch now to at least begin to dislodge the rear takedown pin. Once it's, and it's not probably not going to show up very well, if at all, but once it's partially pressed through, then it can be removed manually. Or physically with your fingers easily, instead of having to tap it. You don't have to drive the whole thing through, but you have to start it like that. That's an unfortunate thing, but it does rock this thing up so that the upper receiver doesn't sit there and wiggle side to side and up and down and whatever in the lower. So what I did was a pair of scissors and some electrical tape. And this is some serious Southern engineering here, okay, folks? But it worked. What I did was, this is the hole which the rear takedown pin passes through, and what I did is I stacked piece after piece after piece of electrical tape on here until when I closed the lower and the upper together, what happened was the pin hole didn't perfectly align any longer, and then I crushed it, by gripping it firmly and shoved the pin through, and that has taken the slop out of the upper to the lower receiver. It's virtually free, it's easy to do, and you can do it if you have some electrical tape and a pair of scissors. You can do it right now today if you're trying to eliminate this problem. I know there's some commercial products that are made for this. I wanted to do it right now, and that works. And the biggest thing is I'm trying to find out why it is that my groupings are so poor. Even at 100 yards, if I'm keeping it on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, I'm getting tickled. I mean, that's just sad. So I don't know, with a solid rest too. I mean, I've got it locked down and I'm all over the place, and I'm not sure if it's the wiggle in the receiver, the two receiver pieces. I'm not sure what the problem is, but the first thing I want to do is get rid of this slop. So I did that. So a little bit of electrical tape and build it up until it doesn't want to close all the way. Squish it, drive that pin through. The only thing that stinks is that you can't take your can't take it apart without basically a punch and a hammer. Excuse me. That's how tight it is, at least on mine. The next thing that I had as a problem that I was frustrated with was on the trigger group here. Oops. Yeah, on the trigger group, and I'll show you that. What happens is that when you pull the trigger back all the way to the rearmost position, as the bolt slides back and recocks. As the bolt slides back and recocks the hammer, it drives the I'm sorry, I'm not sure of the precise terms, but what it does is it drops the there we go. There. It will come back and set the hammer on the trigger sear. I'm not really sure. I'm sure there's a better technical term for it. Sorry, I'm not an expert at much of anything. Anyway, don't know what the professional term is, the proper term is, technical term is. What will happen is that the hammer comes back, and what happens is, normally this is the sear for the trigger that holds the hammer back. When you've pulled it, so it's rocked forward like this, it won't engage the sear on the hammer. So in order to keep it from the hammer from just flying back forwards and just resting on the end of the bolt, it has this sear here, which catches it somewhat like that. Okay. Well, the problem was that when I had this thing rolled forward as I was holding the trigger as far to the rear as I could, in order for this thing to pivot back far enough, and it's not going to display well here, but in order for it to rock back enough like this so that it could get over this hump here, it would actually have to rock the trigger back. So what that meant is that when you're sitting here and you're holding the trigger all the way to the rear, as the bolt violently slides back, slams that hammer back, engaging that secondary sear there, it would actually rock the trigger back, and it was like having somebody spank your finger. It's really just awful. And I don't really run into it if I'm trying to shoot accurately, where where I'm pulling gently and whatever. Where I found the problem was that when I'm just plinking and I'm tending to violently pull the trigger, I'm pulling it all the way to the rear, the hammer resets, or actually catches the secondary sear here and slaps my finger every time. I didn't really like that, so I thought I'd do something about that. I did two things. First thing I did was I took a file and I started grinding away this material here, which I believed was blocking the rocking of the of this piece, so it was actually striking the bottom of this trigger tray. Well, that sort of might have been part of the problem. The biggest problem, however, was, and this is the part that is kind of a neat trick, there is a spring in here, of course, that keeps that sear piece rocked forward, and it actually rests right here in this little cavity here. What I did was I cut about 2 turns off of this screw, because the spring. The problem was that when the spring was fully compressed, it was still so tall that it still wound up with that violent action in the trigger. Cutting the material out was all well and good, that at least it would rock back now, but the spring was preventing that from happening, because even fully compressed, it was still too tall. So what I did is, like I said, cut about 2 turns off of it with a pair of dikes, no big deal, and then I took a couple of small pairs of pliers and I stretched the spring back out to pretty much get the original height. So I get the travel that I need, not only in the extension as it holds it forward to catch the trigger, but also in the compression. Now when it rolls back, it doesn't rock the whole trigger assembly back, so it doesn't slap my finger, which, is that big a deal? I don't know, but I didn't like it. I wanted to change it, so that's what I did.